Hello, welcome to this debate among candidates for the Utah State Board of Education in District 1. Now, District 1 includes parts of Cache, Rich, Box Elder, Summit, and Morgan counties. My name is Jay Evenson. I'm an opinion writer for the Deseret News, and I will be your moderator today. Our candidates are Curtis Benjamin, a Democrat, and Jenny Earl, a Republican, who is also the incumbent. Our goal today is to provide a platform that will help you, the voters, to make an informed decision in the upcoming general election. And just to remind you, Election Day is November 8th. But as most people in Utah vote by mail, ballots will begin to go out in the mail about 2 weeks from today, which is October 18th. Now, the rules of this debate are simple. Each candidate will be given 90 seconds, first for an opening statement, and then 90 seconds each to respond to questions. If we need to have a rebuttal, I'll allow another 30 seconds. Now, I plan to ask questions of our candidates for the first 30 minutes of this hour-long debate. I would like you, the viewers, to please submit your questions to be asked for the final 30 minutes of this debate. You can please put those in the chat function of YouTube. We would appreciate it, and you may begin doing so now. Prior to the debate, I met with the candidates. We went over the rules. We used a random number process to choose who will go first, and that will be Curtis Benjamin. You may now proceed with your 90-second opening statement.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to the Debate Commission, to all those that are involved in making this call happen and to this debate happen, and especially thank you, Jenny, for participating, and as a constituent, thank you for serving as our board member in District 1. My name is Kurt Benjamin, and I love education. My life has been changed, and maybe many of yours as well have been changed by good educators. Their influence and example changed my life and even led me to the classroom, where for over 2 decades I had the privilege to teach, to coach. And in Central Utah, I taught English, social studies, humanities, debate, and coach cross country and track. And it was wonderful to be able to do that. I now, for the last 8 years, I've been working to support educators as an advocate and supporter of public education and students, working for local teachers associations in Northern Utah. I think what I would bring is some insight, not only being a former practitioner, but an advocate as well. And as a father, grandfather, community member, I appreciate the role that parents, families, communities play in supporting students and their schools. I'm a student of education, whether it's through graduate school or just the experience that I have in listening to educators throughout my area and what they're experiencing. And I've always been interested in the questions and concerns facing our individual as well as collective responsibility to provide the best possible opportunity for young people to learn. For me, the purpose of education is joy. Education increases the chance of a good life, both individually and as a society, and deserves our attention and investment, and really is truly life itself. And I think I would be able to bring a familiarity with the process, a passion for education,
your time
and a devotion to our students in our schools throughout Utah. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yes, thank you so much for doing these debates. I so appreciate this, and I'm so grateful to have a candidate, actually, or another person running against me. This is is it a great blessing when you have to stand up and actually articulate where you stand on ideas and processes and where you want to be moving forward. Just a couple things. I have absolutely loved serving on the state board. I love the research. I love the engagement in the schools. I've been able to visit most of my schools individually, and often I hear from them saying, we've never had someone from the state school board come visit us before. So it has been an absolute joy. Just a couple of things I want to be looking at in the future. Coming out of this last legislative session, there were a couple of issues, not issues, but necessarily things that I wanted to focus on. A couple of those things are the simplification of processes for our educators, for our administration. We need to simplify things. We're seeing more processes being put into place, which also makes it harder for our educators to actually do the work that they need to do. So that's one of the key things I would say. And then asking the question is, who is responsible? Who is responsible for the things we're doing? If it's parents' responsibility, let's have parents do it. If it's an educators, if it's administrators, if it's the state boards, if it's a local LEA, we need to be asking who is accountable. I often have constituents call and ask that question: who do I touch base with, and who's the go-to person on a particular issue? Just a couple of quick more things. It looks like I'm almost out of time, but let me hit just a couple of things. I think another key thing we need to be doing is better engagement between our educators and our parents. And that would be one of the things I'm focusing on. We've already started focusing on the state level, and we will continue to look at that, and I will continue to move that forward. So we'll go ahead, and looks like time's up. So
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I want to start off with just kind of a basic overall question, and we'll go with Jenny first on this. What is your assessment of public education in Utah and where we are right now? Are we succeeding, and in what ways are we succeeding? And where do we need improvement? And how would you help bring those about as a member of the State Board of Education?
thank you. This is a good question. We just published our latest assessment results, and those results show that we have areas of need of improvement, specifically in our academic areas, where we have, for the overall state, proficiency is pretty close to 40% for math, for our reading, for our science. And so when we ask, is there areas and room for improvement? There are areas for improvement. And this goes back to some of my focus, and that focus being on simplification. We need to get back to strong academics within our classrooms. And we need to get back to providing teachers with the resources they need and the time they need. This last legislative session, the state board sponsored, and that's something I've continued to sponsor and advocate for, is that additional time and resources for our educators. And then once again, getting back to the simplification, and the expectation being right along the academic lines, letting us get back to those key things I think parents are interested in and educators are so good at. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Curtis.
Jay, would you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I want to know your overall assessment of public education in Utah. Where are we succeeding? Where are we failing? And what would you do as a member of the board to help education?
Yeah, of course there's room for improvement. And Jenny cited a couple of places that we need to be looking. But I think overall, I applaud our educators, and they've had a tough couple of years. The state of education coming out of what was a lockdown and then a reopening, and then navigating through these last couple of years of COVID-19. I think we've seen educators really step up. And I think the role of USBE is to provide that support and direction and continuity to be able to do so. I think providing clear standards is really important, and the evaluation process that teachers go through. Right now, the board is engaged in revamping the evaluation process, and I think recognizing what teachers really are good at, recognizing how we can improve their craft through evaluation is essential growing good teachers, and then of course providing an excellent education to their students and to our kids. I think the state of education in Utah is good, and recent funding to promote retaining teachers and attracting teachers has stepped up. But I think that's another area that we could look at as well. And I think a board member can advocate for that kind of continued investment in education, and making sure that teachers have the resources that they need to be able to do the job that we're asking them to do.
All right, thank you. Second question, we'll begin with Curtis on this. As you both know, the state board now is a partisan body, and as a candidate, you're running with party labels attached. I want to know how and in what ways the affiliation will affect.
Now, Jay, I don't know if Jenny experienced this, but I think you were cutting out a little bit. I didn't hear the question. I got the gist of it, but
yeah, it kind of froze on my end too, and I apologize for that. Yeah. I want to know what your party label means to you in terms of how you will make decisions as a board member.
Yeah, up to this race, like you say, it's been nonpartisan, and you know, I think I'd prefer it that way. Now, of course, the guy that's running in a party that would be considered the minority party might think that way, I suppose. But I don't think I'm alone in that. I have a lot of Republican friends and family that also can see the other side of that coin and recognize that if the shoe were on the other foot, that we would want, because really our students are nonpartisan. But education is a political endeavor. I don't think we need to kid ourselves about that either. But I think we do a disservice if it's partisan. That said, it is what it is, and I am running as a Democrat in this race. Education of kids is a political concern. Voting citizens interested in our future. Nothing prevents anybody from voting across party lines. And I know the labels help people identify what matters. And for me, being a longtime Democrat, it has meant that education is front-loaded, is at the forefront of a lot of policy decisions for Democrats. And I appreciate how it's a key concern, but it's not just a key concern for Democrats, it's a key concern for Republicans as well. And so I'm hoping that people will be able to see, maybe through the debate like this, that I also offer answers that they're looking for as well.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yes, so I actually think that having it be a partisan race is very beneficial to our communities. And there's a number of reasons why. I ran last time when it was not partisan, and it was harder to actually go engage in, if there were community things going on, it was more difficult. This allowing partisanship races allows for additional support. It allows for additional engagement. And I think that's highly beneficial. It also, as Curtis identified, it also allows you to have an idea of where someone stands on certain policies and certain platforms. And I think I do think that is beneficial. Now, I think we'd like to think that would love for things not to be political, right? Especially in education. And I frequently hear that from people. But the truth of the matter is, in almost everything I engage in has some element of politics associated with it. For example, this week, we're actually looking at a number of grants coming from the federal government. And so we have to look at what are the strings attached? What will this mean for education in Utah? Will that change policies? Will that change the way we do, that we engage here in the state? So I do think that there are some key components when it's partisan and some benefits to it.
Thank you. We'll go back to Jenny on this question. Now, the state board, as you know, distributes billions of dollars with a B to districts and to charter schools. Explain to us what qualifies you to manage such a budget.
Well, there's a couple of things. There's two, I think for finances, there's two key pieces. Number one, principles, no matter how small or large, are still the same when it comes to financial engagement. The other thing is, and I don't know if you watched the last board meeting, this was a frustration I had, is we're not getting a budget. We're getting a make your recommendations. We'll find out what the budget is later. And that kind of is an angst for me. I like to know what parameters we're working in so I can best put those things forward that are most needed for our communities, and not just this open financial kind of thing, whatever we want, and then we'll have to cut back later kind of a thing. So that for me, I think we need to be, it's principle. And then the second part is we need the right people in place. So when I say the right people, most of the work we do at the state board is done by staff. And so making sure we have the key staff doing an excellent job. I don't have to know everything, but I do have to know whether or not our key people are competent to do the work that they're doing, of which we have some great people that follow through on our finances and are quick to answer questions and help us get to the answers that we need. And so those are the two things, principles and people.
Thank you. Curtis.
I think when we look at a budget or any kind of financial fiduciary duty that we have dealing with the public funds, we're looking at moral principles. We're putting money where we value things, right? And I think the first priority is what is it that we value, and then to what extent, right? What figure will we put on that to be able to implement or to make real that value, to realize that thing. I think that's one role that a board member has, is to be able to identify what those things are, and then whether in a budget or in a wish list, as Jenny was kind of just describing, whatever approach that we're taking, those principles inform that process. What I bring with me is a pretty broad perspective about what those values are, what's out there for our students. And in the work that I do, I work with a budget, right? It's not a $7 billion budget, but I think budgets large or small have the same principles attached to them. That the idea is, what do you spend your money on, and how does that reflect your values? And how does that really make students' lives better and make our society better as an extension of how we're educating kids? And so I would bring that perspective, and again, rely on the people that we've hired at the board level to be able to help us with that.
Thank you. This will be directed at Curtis first. You will need to have a relationship between the board and the state legislature, and both offices are independently elected. The legislature holds the purse strings. State lawmakers have at times injected themselves into schools and decision-making, and we saw that during the pandemic. Schools may now pivot to online learning only if the governor, the Senate president, the House Speaker, and the state superintendent of public instruction jointly approve. I want to ask you what the proper relationship do you think is between the State Board of Education and the legislature? Do we have that proper relationship now, and how would you go about fostering it?
As you mentioned, the legislature provides direction, particularly along the lines of funding, right? Allocates the funding for schools. And like I've mentioned before, it has been increasingly able to do more and more, which I think as a USB board member and as the board in general, we can be advocates for that process to occur. We can be encouraging of that, right? To say, that's what our kids need. That's what our educators need. That's good for for attraction and retention of good educators. And we can use our voice there to be able to encourage that process, to lobby for that kind of effort, certainly. But I think it's important to have a distinction between the legislative branch and the executive branch, the legislative branch and the school board, that the school board is an implementer of policies that are posed and passed by the legislature, but that the legislature, I think, has a role also to recognize that it's not the school board, right? That we don't need a school board of over, of 100 people. We need those 15 individuals that have been elected by their districts to be able to implement these processes. And I think, and then the local school districts, we need to be able to allow them to make the decisions that they need to make as well.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yes. So I love this question. Long before I ran for any political office, I was a citizen lobbyist, meaning that I read through the bills, I read through what the laws were, and engaged with lawmakers on those key things that I was seeing needed. And then it's been just awesome to have that extended into the state board role, to be able to engage with legislators on a very direct level, to know them by name, and to be able to have that working relationship between education and the lawmakers in such a way that we can communicate and collaborate and work towards what's most effective for children. I don't know that that's always been the case throughout the years that the state board has had that kind of engagement, but it certainly is something that I have loved being part of. And I've also, and it just makes me think of Dan Johnson specifically, 2 bills that he ran this last year, that one was a civics education bill, another one was a language bill. And both of these was able to reach out to him and engage in that process and kind of share what we're seeing in education with him. And so I just think this being able to engage with each other and have that communication and collaboration is key for success for our students and for legislators.
Thank you. I want to pause here for just a second and make another plea to our viewing audience. We're approaching the half-hour mark of this debate, and we really would like to hear questions from you. What do you think is important? What would you like these candidates to answer? Please put those in the chat function of YouTube. Thank you. So now we move on. Jenny, you will have the first chance at this question. Recently, as you know, the state school board voted to withdraw its support for the biannual student survey known as the SHARPS survey after about 20 years or so of support. Concerns were raised by some board members about some of the questions on the survey. Other people expressed support for continuing to collect data used to address the needs of students. And now the board is asking for public input. Tell me your feelings on this and whether you agree with the board's decision to withdraw support.
So there are concerns with the survey that continue to surface over the years. And when something continues to surface, it isn't that people misunderstand. It is that something needs to be addressed or changed. And so there's a couple of primary issues, and I was part of the committee that are over the last several weeks that was engaged in this. But one of the key things we're finding is that the length of the survey itself it's about a 45-minute survey. The length is pretty excessive for a survey. The other thing we're finding is that, for example, the cigarette questions, there are over 30 questions just asking about cigarettes. And so the question becomes, how many of these do we need? And which of those need to be prioritized and which are most important? This is a key thing, I think, with this survey, is to get down to what do we really need and who's best to ask for that information and who's best to implement it. So when I first got on the board, we redid our health standards. It was key that we worked with our health department, with community members, with parents, with the various preventions prevention specialists throughout the state so that we could build within our health standards the protective factors and the risk factors that would be most beneficial for children. And when we were finished with that, we had a very sound group of health standards, but we continue to see more and more things being put on the backs of our teachers, and we need to balance that back out. And that has to do with the SHARP survey. So I look forward to further dialogue in regards to this.
Thank you. Curtis.
Yeah, as an educator, I can still remember when the SHARP survey was being presented for students. And I remember some of those concerns about the length of the survey, about how students, whether how seriously or not seriously they were taking it, the concerns maybe parents had about it, all those kinds of concerns that Jenny's raised. And certainly when you're hearing people talk about those, when that becomes amplified, it's worth taking a look at again. If it's not the SHARP survey, what will it be then? Because I think the one benefit of the SHARP survey was to give insights about concerns that we do have about young people, about the exposure that they have to illicit drugs or to ideations about mental health. And I'm not so sure asking the questions create ideations, right? I think that's one of the concerns that's been out there. I'm not sure that, or else we would have seen that probably before now. But they're in this process, and I understand districts can still use the SHARP survey, but what will the USBE sponsor instead, or support instead, or recommend instead of the SHARP survey to be able to get the kind of insights, along with conversations with health officials and mental health specialists and counselors in the schools about what's affecting our kids. We need to have some kind of insight about that. And if it's not the SHARP survey, then as a board member, I'd be investigating about what it would be instead.
Thank you.
May I do a 30-second rebuttal, or at least just a response? I don't know that I'm trying to rebuttal the comments, but maybe a response. I do think that we have to be careful that we don't put a survey over meeting with communities and parents to find what works best. And what I mean by that is when you gather information from people in a collaborative effort, the survey provides one tool and one mechanism, but it cannot, if it is the only thing we're using, we run into significant problems because we may be missing key things that are going on in a community, or we may be overemphasizing things in a community too. And so I just think that coordination is key.
Thank you. Curtis, would you like another 30 seconds?
Well, I don't know if I'll need 30 to agree with that statement. I think a survey is not the end all and be all of getting information, obviously. I think what we're looking at is a collaborative effort with others, and the survey can inform, it can give us the students' point of view, but it needs to be part of a suite of things that we're doing to address concerns that we see.
Thank you. We do have a question from the viewing audience, and we have reached the half-hour point. What past experiences make you the candidate of choice, and how will those experiences uniquely qualify you to be successful in your role? Curtis, I believe we're starting with you.
Well, I would point, I guess, first of all, to my time as a classroom teacher. I don't, having been out of the classroom now for 8 years, I don't know exactly what it's like to be in the classroom right now. But I did have 23 years in high school classrooms and working with young people. And so that gives me some insight. I don't think that's a prerequisite to being on the board. Obviously, we would very much limit the field of citizens being able to run for board positions if we just said that you had to be an educator. And but I think it does give me a unique insight to what learning looks like in the classroom, to the pressures that teachers feel, and to how we best coordinate with parents. I think those are all important elements that you can take back from the classroom. And I think of this role that I've had for the last 8 years as an advocate, meeting now not just working within the classroom, but then also working within working with administrators and other educators and hearing what education feels like now, and getting that perspective has also been immensely helpful. I also have training in education that I think also gives me another insight. But most of all, I think it's my role as a parent and a grandparent, and the passion that I bring to education for their benefit that can inform what I want to see happen for my kids and hope happens for kids throughout the state.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yes, it makes me think of a couple of things. Number one, I'm not afraid of the work. I work hard. I do a lot of in-depth research. I ask a lot of questions. I engage with people. I call people. I've spent, during the summer, there were a number of people that we had differences of approach and opinions on, and we went to lunch and we talked about those, and we engaged with one another in a way that I think was very productive, in that I could gain a deeper understanding of where they were coming from on educational pursuits. And then hopefully they could understand where I was coming from too. A couple other things. I do have an education background. I have a master's degree in education. I enjoy going into the classes and listening to the dialogue going on, watching students learn, and spending time actually in the schools, seeing what's happening and asking what's happening. That's just kind of the way I do things. I have to ask the questions, and then I get in and kind of get to the meat of what's happening and try to find out how people are feeling about things and where they want to go and what direction they want to go, or what things are not working. And then asking the questions, how could we better do that? And once again, back to my original statement, I want things simplified. I want our educators to be successful. I want our students to be highly proficient in those key things that'll create success in their life. And I want our parents engaged in the process and part of what's going on.
Thank you. We're still waiting for more questions from our viewing audience, so I will forge ahead here. Earlier this year, we'll begin with Jenny. And earlier this year, as you know, the state board decided that after hours of discussion and development, it would not be providing local districts with guidance concerning gender identity questions, such as policies concerning restrooms, locker rooms, overnight trips, that sort of thing. Such policies would instead be left up to local school districts. Please tell me if you agree with that decision.
Yes. So a couple of things. Late nights, might I add. This was not just hours and hours of debate. These were many late nights. So just a couple of thoughts in regards to that. I think this is an area that local schools need to be paying attention to for sure. And it seems to be a moving target currently. We're seeing with Title IX, we're seeing additions of new language there. We're seeing different court cases. We're seeing different policies coming up. So there, you know, we kind of went back and forth on this quite a bit. Where do we step in, and where is it a local district's prerogative to address these issues? There's many things that are already in law, and that includes the protections of parental rights and engagement for their children. And those are only removed under very specific circumstances. And so we already have a lot of provisions in law when it comes to engagement, when it is associated with gender. There's also there's just a number of districts have begun to put policies together. I think they're cautious to make sure they're sticking within Utah law. The other reason we took a number of states' policies from around the nation and tried to make them Utah's policy. And you can imagine how messy that is, because we're trying to apply their perspective to our state. And that's where things, I think things kind of began to get really complicated there. So I think I do agree with the direction we've taken. And anyways, I do look forward to continue to work on this particular issue.
Thank you. Curtis.
The board has a space, I think. It's totally understandable. Back in April, I think 20,000 responses, more than any other issue that might have approached any governmental entity, there was a lot of interest in this particular issue. But the USB does have a role, if nothing else, an advisory backstop kind of role. But having put it back to local school boards, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, they're wrangling with those questions about what are individual students' rights, right? And what does the law say about that? And what about children's identity? Do we need to make sure that we recognize and then weigh against privacy concerns and other concerns that weigh in as well? And I think local boards grappling with this are doing it's hard to know if something's a good job or if it's satisfactory or not. This is an issue that deals so much with what the Constitution says and what Title IX will be saying, and what and references to other legal standards, and of course what the child's needs are. I don't know what it's like to have these questions about gender identity, and to be able to take into perspective of those that maybe I don't understand and yet still need to listen to.
Thank you. This next question concerns parental involvement. Recently, the state board passed a rule requiring school districts and charter schools to make the selection of books and videos and the process of reviewing complaints about them more transparent and publicly available to parents. All curriculum committees for schools must now include at least one parent who has a child at the school and who is, quote, reflective of the school's community. Do you support this rule, and does it satisfy the need for greater parental involvement? We'll begin with Curtis.
I don't know if any single rule will satisfy the need for greater parental involvement, but the better we can do at representing multiple perspectives and the demographics of a community, whether we're talking about library material policy, for example, or if we're talking about what we were just talking about with transgender rights. And the better we can do at inviting people to be part of these conversations, I think the better we're going to understand where people are coming from in terms of what direction we might take in the future. Establishing some kind of systematic way of representing multiple voices, I think, is appropriate. Saying that, let's make sure we have people, if we live in an area that is represented pretty highly by particular racial diversity, that we are representing that racial diversity in the area as well. So yeah, I think a rule like that can be helpful, but it's not all that we need to be able to encourage parents to be involved.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yes, would you mind repeating the question one more time? I want to make sure I understand the full.
Certainly, this has to do with the rule concerning selection of books and videos and the process of reviewing content and complaints about them, and making that more transparent and publicly available to parents. And also that curriculum committees must include at least one parent who has a child at the school and who is reflective of the school's community. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I was just making sure I wanted to understand the actual premise of it. So just a couple of things. I don't know why we wouldn't include parents in this engagement process. And it speaks to needing to make some kind of a rule around that type of a thing, because these are their children. We are the support for them. They're not the secondary. They are the main reason why we do this, that we provide education. Just a couple of things when it comes to the library materials, if that's, I know this is instructional materials, which could extend to many areas. If you haven't viewed some of this content and are not aware of it, for those that are listening, you need to take a minute and go beyond what you're seeing on the news and really look at some of the books and the content that's going on, because there's a reason why we're asking parents to be there. There's a reason why we're asking people to engage in this process. And it does have to do with explicit content, and really engaging in the dialogue of what is appropriate. Another thing is, I just wrote down as you were reading that, all parents within a school system are reflective of that community. And so I think the question is becoming not, do we create some kind of a percentile, but do we create an opportunity for information to get to all parents so that they can be engaged in this process? I think that's where I would focus, and I have focused on that, is for all parents to be engaged.
Thank you. Recently, there have been a lot of issues concerning LGBTQ students and transgender students. And also in Davis, the Davis district, there have been questions about racial discrimination. I want to ask you what you think the board's role is in ensuring that all students feel included and valued. And I believe we're beginning with Jenny.
Yes. So part of my platform focuses on building the capacity of children. That isn't only some children. That isn't only a few children. It's building the capacity of all children within the school system. There's many things that we can do to do that. One of the key things, and one of our key protective factors that the school plays a key role in, is academic excellence. And so as we increase the excellence of academics and the structure associated with that, you automatically increase the protective factors and the success of children, and that's all children. I do think that it's important that we make sure that this is back to the parents, that the parents and the educators are communicating, that if there is some kind of a concern that arises within the school setting, that there's a mechanism for both parents and children, as well as educators, to be able to respond to that. And then for a clear understanding of how administration will address those issues. So.
Thank you. Curtis.
Yeah, because the USBE, I think, is really falls under the mandate to make sure that every child receives an equitable education. We would have a role at the USBE level to ensure that, right? To insist that every child attending public schools is free from discrimination, incidences of racism, of bigotry, harassment, anything like that. I think it's twofold. I think it can write or model good policy language to address these conditions, and then provide additional space for accountability. I think we need to make sure that wherever there are unsafe or intolerable conditions that affect learning, recognize that it doesn't just affect learning; it damages people, right? So academic excellence is, that's the reason why we built the schools, right? Is so that people can learn geography and geometry and language arts and the content. And we put teachers and students together in rooms to be able to learn. But what if conditions in that school are such that, or in a district are such that some students are impaired in that regard because of who they are, because of what they look like? Then there need to be mechanisms in place to make sure that if that is happening, that it stops happening, and that if it and to be able to prevent it from happening.
Thank you. We do have another question here from our viewing audience. This is from Monica G. How do we keep the federal government out of Utah's education and Utah's curriculum? And she adds they are currently involved in Davis County. I believe we begin with Curtis.
I think the federal government may have a role, albeit a limited one, in making sure, we were just talking about issues about inclusion, equity, diversity, making sure that there's non-discrimination, those kinds of things. I think it's imperative that what happens in a school in Utah and what happens in a school in Indiana regarding issues of equality and liberty and justice are equal. And I think there is a federal role for those kinds of things, whether it's Title IX or the Civil Rights Act or other issues where the federal government can step in. I think the federal government can also provide funding for all kinds of initiatives. I think probably the most important being in special needs, making sure that those kids are provided with opportunities to have access to education as well. And so the federal government has a role. That said, there are uniquely Utah solutions to Utah problems in the schools. And to the degree that those are presented to us, that's where we need to look to, is what we can do as a Utah school board of education to be able to solve those kinds of problems.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yeah, this is a great question. We saw the beginning of the summer with the child nutrition program where the federal government was saying, we'll give you money, but here you go, you got to do this and this and this. And you know, there were, I think our attorney generals actually filed with some other states, you know, a pushback on this, saying, wait a minute, you know, why would you ever put funding for kids and nutrition in the middle of a political debate? So, you know, and this brings up, this is a great question, because can Utah start moving away from those ties and that money that's associated? It isn't in the whole picture. It's not a large sum of money. I mean, it's a large amount of money, but it's not a percent wise, right? But yet often those programs will influence a lot of what goes on within our schools. And so, yeah, I do think there is a need for the state board to say, look, we're responsible, we're accountable, we are the ones making these decisions, looking at whether that funding is going to be valuable or whether it's just another, you know, another pot of money to go in a direction we didn't know we needed. And I've had this happen a couple of times this year where right before a board meeting, we get a possibility of a grant. And then we get to the board meeting and said, well, have we not been funded in this area? Assessments is one of those. And then the question becomes, if we needed the money, would our state provide that for us? And we didn't know we needed it until 2 days ago when the government said, we'll give you more money. So I think this even speaks to just the sound financial principles, right? And deciding where we're going and how we're going to get there. So I think there is room to the state taking control instead of the federal government.
Thank you. Utah has perpetually faced, it seems like to me, a shortage of teachers statewide. And we also have a problem with retention of new teachers. What should the state board do to increase the pool of competent, qualified teachers from which districts and charter schools can fill this need and to retain those good teachers that we have? Jenny, we begin with you.
Yeah, I think there are some key things we can do. One of those things, and we're already doing this throughout the state, it's the Grow Your Own program. A lot of districts are participating in this type of a program where they're able to help individuals that are working in the schools already receive a teaching degree and be able to come into the classroom, or others within the community that are interested. These are some things that we're doing, but I think the other key thing is keeping our good educators there. This speaks to simplification, making sure that we're not overburdening our educators with just more and more programs and more things, or we're changing things up on our educators. When you change one set of standards and you change them frequently, you end up causing a disruption to the way educators are, their routine and the things they're doing. So we have to be careful on how we proceed that way at the state level. Also, clarity of standards. A really clear set of standards helps an educator understand exactly what needs to be taught and how to measure that. if we leave our standards too ambiguous or too broad, it doesn't allow for that, for them to be able to address the key components of the standards. And then the other thing is to consolidate and to make sure we get the resources to our educators that we need, because then it creates a more cohesive environment where they want to stay and be part of what's going on.
Thank you. Curtis.
Yeah, over the last several years, I think we've already kind of applauded the legislative efforts to be able to provide resources to increase pay, all those kinds of things through the WPU, and I would encourage continued growth that way. But what we're finding is it's not just the pay, right? It's not just what teachers are earning. We've seen dramatic changes to salary schedules over the last several years, and what I'm hearing from teachers is that's great. But we've also got a lot on our plates, and coming out of COVID, and then adjusting to the new normal, where we thought maybe it was going to feel pretty good, and it turns out there's still a lot of overwhelm out there, and that's what I'm hearing about. And I think that teacher burnout, that sense of having more expected on. I think one example might be the LETTERS program, the literacy program that came kind of from the state into the districts, which every teacher I've talked to has said it's a great program, but it's one more thing for K-3 teachers to have to attend to. What can we do when there's something like that, something good like that comes down the pipeline? What can we do to make sure that we're supporting teachers, giving them the time that they need, and then being able to also compensate them perhaps for the extra time that's there? I think those are things that I think we can look at. And then I think finally standards. I think Jenny referred to that. I think standards need to be clear, but they also need to be robust. We need to make sure that we are, I think the irony is that paradoxically, we actually attract people to a robust system. They say, this is really a profession, and this is something that I can belong to, and that I can matter for.
May
Thank
I
you.
make a comment just to that? And speaking to the LETTERS program, this is one of those places where we could have coordinated better with our legislators. And I say we as in, we were engaging with them, but it should have started earlier, and with legislators as well, starting earlier with us, that when you have a disconnect, you end up racing to something, I think, that is good, but maybe needs to be calculated just a little different, because the state board did not take a position in support of this at this time. They wanted a few things changed, so it didn't do exactly what Curtis had reflected. So I just wanted to, interject that. So
Thank you. Curtis, would you like 30 seconds?
No, I think that's fine.
Thank you. I believe we have time for just one more question, and we don't have any further questions from our audience. State lawmakers have been talking about proposing a constitutional amendment or a change to the state constitution that would change how schools are funded. Now, for about 90 years or so, income taxes in Utah have been solely directed to public and higher education, with a few other little programs that have been added recently. But there's been talk about changing that and opening up those funds for all programs, which would essentially require public education to compete with all other programs for funding. I am wondering how you feel about this, if you think this is a good idea. And I believe we start with Curtis.
Now, I wasn't there when they made the decision 90 years ago, obviously, to know what was in the head of people that decided that we needed to carve out a particular place in the Constitution, or for the role of the income tax to be devoted just to education. I'd like to think that they did so because they knew there was a need for it, that the money was there, and that it provided a separate space for that money, for the collection and allocation of those funds. I like that it's there. I'm not in a hurry to see that go away. Utah's unique in having a provision like this that separates it. As we've already discussed, politics will always enter into the discussion of education funding. We know that'll happen, but saying that we actually value education to the extent that one source of funding, and I understand a lot of the complications with the sales tax and where the money comes from and how it and how we're worried about one system maybe losing money and the other one maybe gaining too much or whatever. But when we can say there's one place where that speaks to our values, as we talked about earlier, that the finances speak to our values. We say that education is our most important consideration, that the education of children matters. And I think that's what we say when we have this bifurcation of the two funds.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yeah, this has already been opened up. So this is a dialogue that's been going on for a few recent years, is, those funds being used for other things. And, there were some guarantees put into place that I think will be highly beneficial for education. But there is an element of risk that we're looking at with that, right? And just as Curtis has said, where are priorities, where do those need to be? So there does need to be caution there. I do think there is the other key component, which this goes back to the federal government again. Our school land funds, our trust land properties, these need to be, and we've made great improvements over the years. We really do reap great financial benefits from them, but we really need to be in control of our lands here. And that, to me, that is another mechanism for us to have resources available for our school children, for the children in Utah. And so I'm grateful for those that take the time to push back on this and to engage with this. So did I hear a comment? So anyways.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all of our viewers who have submitted questions, and thank you to both of our candidates. We'll now, I will allot, just to alert our timekeeper, 1 minute for closing statements. And we began this debate with Curtis, so we'll begin this portion with Jenny.
Yes, I just a couple of key things. I think our collaboration between educators and parents, and to be able to have that open communication is so important. That is something I will continue to work on, making sure that there's clear understanding of what goes on in education, and that we're not overstepping, both for educators and parents. I always encourage parents to engage in a positive way, and to also engage in a way that goes to the lowest level and works its way up. Getting key supports for our educators, resources, time, and even the ability to say or to acknowledge the growth that's taking place and the good things going on. I do think we need to get back to academics, that excellence in academics, and really refocus on these things. They are the protective factor that we are responsible for in the education system. One other thing is that I really feel strongly about, and that is that key data protection for our educators and children. And that's one thing I've been following as well. But I look forward to continuing to serve the people in District 1, and feel happy to reach out to me, and we can engage in this process together.
Thank you. Curtis.
Well, obviously, I hope this debate's been informative, and I hope you vote for me, right? But if I continue to be Jenny's constituent, or if I continue to support education in other roles, or if I have the honor of being able to serve constituents here in District 1, what I hope we take away from this is that we can be champions of public education, right? That is foundational to democratic society, that we need to honor and trust our educators and be advocates for them and for their students. That we need to involve parents and families, and make sure that, as they're the first educators, and we need to be able to involve their voices into the decisions that we make as well. And that we're all about trying to generate growth and academic rigor and all those kinds of things, but we also need to make sure that we're supporting our kids, all of our kids. Some come to school with real concerns about whether we support them or not. And so we need to make sure that there are things in place to be able to make sure that all kids get a fair and equitable education. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to both Jenny Earl and Curtis Benjamin for a very informative debate. I believe at the beginning of the debate, I failed to mention and thank our sponsors. So I'd like to do so now. The sponsors of this debate are the Hinckley Institute of Politics, KSL and the Deseret News, the United Way of Salt Lake, the Utah PTA, the Sutherland Institute, and the Utah Association of Charter Schools. My thanks to them and my thanks to all of you who watch, and hopefully we have helped you to make a more informed decision as you vote this year in these important races. Thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Jay.